So, good morning and good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we will have an introduction to cosmetic preservation, regulation, and new developments. I'm Gail De Maria, Managing Editor at TKS Publisher, here today on behalf of HPC Today Journal. So, thanks and welcome to today's event. I'm smiling because today we are pretty much a lot of people interested in this topic. We are 1,700 people today connecting to our webinar, this live conference. This is because for sure, the topic, preservation in cosmetics, it's one of the hottest topics of the moment, but also for sure for our lineup of speakers of worldwide experts. And not forgetting our chairman, Perry Romanowski. But today, I would like to start by welcoming and thanking our sponsor, which is Emerald Kalama Chemical. Emerald is a leading provider of specialty ingredients optimized to bring performance and value to globally trusted personal and household care brands, with a focus on providing high-quality, natural identical ingredients and extensive application expertise. Emerald specializes in consumer-friendly preservation, aroma chemicals, multifunctionals, and optimizing formulations to be higher performing and more robust. Emerald products are responsibly manufactured in the US and Europe, using the highest quality standards. So thanks a lot to our sponsor, today's sponsor, and I invite you to click on the call to action you can find on the top of the screen, so to learn more on Emerald. So thanks a lot. A few housekeeping information. On the right side of the screen, you can find an event board. There you can download the presentations of today. So all the speakers have given green light to share their presentation. So please click on the event board and download the presentations there. If you need to ask any questions to me or to all the speakers, to our technician, Matteo, you can type in your message in the chat box there, and we will try to answer all of them. Let's say that all the answers that won't be answered during the event, the speakers will try to come back to you. So type in your message and they will come back to you with an answer after the event. So I think it's time for me to introduce our friend. I can say friend because Perry Romanowski is one of our columnists on our journal HPC Today, always giving me suggestions, always giving me ideas. And today he is here with us, and I would like to introduce to you. Perry, show up, please, with your camera. Let's see if Perry is here. I will introduce. Okay, thanks, Perry. I wanted to show all the people your face, but everybody knows you. So Perry is an independent cosmetic chemist who has spent over 25 years developing products in the personal care and cosmetic industry. He has worked on both hair and skincare products. He's currently Vice President of Element 44, which specialized in science education. He's a long-time instructor for the SCC Continuing Education Program and has authored or edited 6 books in cosmetic science, plus numerous articles. In 2009, Perry created the Practical Cosmetic Formulating online training program to provide cosmetic chemists continuing education across a broad range of formula categories. So he started many years ago, before this pandemic. He served as the 2019 president of the Society of Cosmetic Chemists, and most recently as the 2020 chair of the Midwest SCC. He's also the current chair of the IVE SCC Educational Committee. He worked for Alberto Culver, serving as a senior project leader for hair care innovation. So he appeared in TV shows, including the Dr. Oz show and the Rachel Ray show. So Perry really, apart from having a bachelor's degree in chemistry, he's founder and creator of the chemistcorner.com website dedicated to teaching about cosmetic science. And today we have the honor to have him here to chair this event. So thanks, Perry, for accepting my proposal.
Thank you. Hello and welcome everybody to this excellent preservative event. Thank you so much to TKS and specifically to Gail for inviting me to participate in the event, and also getting directly involved with the speakers. You know, when Gail first approached me with this event, we brainstormed some ideas. And what we wanted to put together was an in-depth event that looked at cosmetic preservation. One of the most common questions that I get on my website, Chemist Corner, or when I go to events, is people asking about preservatives. There's, you know, as you might realize on the internet, preservatives are much maligned, especially the traditional ones that work really well, and people are always looking for natural preservatives. So what we wanted to do is to create something that's going to take you all the way through everything you need to know about preservatives, beginning from the beginning of, you know, why do we use the traditional ones, and to more advanced stuff like the sustainability and the regulations around preservatives. So we wanted to make a complete event, and so if you go through this event, you're going to be much smarter and have more answers to your preservative questions than when you first start. So I also thought of the people that I knew who were experts in the field, and we arranged to have a number of them speak today. So today we've got 4 talks and 6 speakers, including Rosanna Stokes, David Steinberg, Donald English, Andrea Galati, and Frederica Garavagali. We've got a fully packed event in the next 2 hours. Each talk is going to be about 20 minutes long, and there's going to be about 5 minutes for questions. So while the presenter is giving their talk, if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and post those questions in the chat box. I believe there is a chat box there. I'm going to be going through those questions and moderating them. And at the end of the talk, there should be 5 minutes left for questions for the speakers. If there isn't time during the speaker's talk, we will have some time at the end for answering questions. So be sure to post those questions in that box. Now, so we've got a fully packed event, and you don't want to listen to me talk anymore, so why don't we get started right away with our first speaker. Our first speaker is Rosanna Stokes. She is the America's Business Development Manager at Emerald Kalama Chemicals, where she focuses on the development of biodegradable, nature-identical ingredients for consumer applications. This includes business innovation and regulatory development surrounding multifunctionals and preservatives. Rosanna is a respected entrepreneurial leader. In addition to launching a successful business focused on UV disinfection, she has also focused her career on working with technical and commercial teams to propel new products to the forefront and to drive market shifts. Rosanna holds an MBA in new product development, and she also has a BS in chemistry. I always like it when chemists will come on and give talks. So welcome to the event, Rosanna.
Thank you so much, Perry. And thank you, Gail, too. It's a great honor to be able to talk at this event. I think preservation is extremely important in today's environment. And you really need to think about putting those layers of safety together. And when I think of preservation, I think of a car system, safety system, right? When you go out and buy a car for your family, you think about the prevention and you also think about the protection. So you think about making sure you have good brakes, you have a good seatbelt system, you have airbags in case an accident happens. And you also think about other multi-layers of protection, very similar to preservatives. When you think about preservation at the very top of the list, for prevention, you think about your plant hygiene, making sure you have good quality water and raw materials, you have the right packaging for your product, on how your product's going to be used. And then you think about protection, because in case there's an accident, you have the right kind of layers of safety, preservatives, multifunctionals and boosters, and pH and water activity. And we at Emerald spend a lot of time, and we have a lot of experts around preservation thinking about that safety for you, because it's so important when you've worked so hard to launch just the right product to market that you have that protection. So, what's on consumers' minds these days? So what's going on in the market? We're all struggling with this. This is why we're all online today. Everybody is struggling with the pandemic, and they're thinking about, how do I keep my family safe, and how do I keep myself safe? And they're looking very closely at labels. They're looking at their products they're buying, and they're thinking about the features those products bring and the safety they bring. One of the other key factors people are often thinking about these days is the environment. How do I buy products that reflect my green values? And there's a lot of data around this, but this is something that's going to be around for a long time. And thinking about how to formulate products that provide you with both that safety and those green values is really important. This has not been lost on retailers, especially in the US. So what you're seeing is retailers all over the world are getting on this trend, and they understand what consumers want. So what they've got, and these are just two examples, there's a long list of retailers, but Target and Amazon have a safer chemical policies, and two of the key materials that they restrict from products going into their selling situation are things like parabens and formaldehyde releasers. So those are classic preservatives that are now being restricted. Other companies, even like Lowe's, have gotten on this. And of course, we have the NGOs and the regulatory bodies that have always kind of dominated this space about worrying about what you can use and what you can't use in commercial products. So how does this translate to the market? Because this is what you guys are all doing. You're out there, you're formulating products. You want to give a product that really hits the market and creates interest in the market. And so we're all used to buying these types of products, but the kind of labels we're seeing a lot of these days: sensitive skin. We're seeing things like made from recycled plastic, topics like clean beauty. These are all key things that really point to the fact that the market is really thinking about safety and environmental issues. But you formulators have a really tough job, because you have to incorporate all these things, and you have to also protect the consumer. So you have to think about those layers of safety and how you put those together. Because the worst thing that can happen for you is for that mother that was so interested in making sure she bought the best brand of baby wipes to open up that package and see mold growing. It's not good for your product. It's a big damage on brand. And then there's also the cost of recalls. So these days, formulators have a really tough job. So because of that, I would encourage you to turn to people like Emerald, people that are your suppliers. Make sure that the ingredients you're getting are biodegradable, and they have the green label authorization, so you can put those on those labels of your packages. We are all struggling today with the security of supply. So really understanding where those raw materials come from. Ask your procurement people, partner with them to make sure that you've got a good security of supply. You've got good quality. Emerald focuses a lot on making sure we have the best quality. We have been selling sodium benzoate preservative into food for decades. And so quality is extremely important to us. And we work to make sure that we have high quality. And so ask your suppliers about their quality. Do research on it. Think about your suppliers as innovation partners. We at Emerald see ourselves as a partner to you. Ooh, I don't know what happened. We as ourselves see ourselves as a partner to you in innovation and preservatives. We have the preservative experts on staff, and we're there to help you. So come to your suppliers and ask for help. A good supplier will do that. And then finally, make sure the company you purchase from has your values on sustainability, health and safety for their workers, and the environment. So a little bit about Emerald Kalama Chemicals. Perry introduced us and kind of talked about who we are, but most important to us is that we provide our customers with innovation and nature identical materials. So what do I mean by nature identical materials? Benzoic acid is a great example. It's found in fruits and berries and wine. It's found in nature. However, we synthesize it. And because we synthesize it, we are able to provide you with low cost alternatives to something that would be biosourced. Another thing that we produce are nature identical aroma chemicals. Most likely you guys have numerous nature of our aroma chemicals in your products. And then nature identical multifunctionals. And I'm going to talk a lot about multifunctionals today. Just examples of our products that you may well recognize our brand names. Purox is our sodium benzoate. Caloguard is our sodium benzoate for home care. So we have a new launch where a lot of people are looking for safer home care, greener home care preservatives, and that's our Caloguard sodium benzoate. And then we have two new multifunctionals, Kalama 3PP, which is our personal care multifunctional, and our Emerald X7. All right. So let's talk about what you're doing as a formulator, and you have a really tough job. Because here's the pH scale from 2 to 12. And you can see that mold is prevalent everywhere. And by the way, I work with a lot of customers on how to control bacteria and mold. And mold is one of the biggest issues they suffer with. The great thing I can tell you is that sodium benzoate is really good with mold. But then you have the yeast and the bacteria. So I would point out to you that if you're making personal care products, that the skin-friendly pH is anywhere from 4.2 to 5.9. And that is a great sweet spot for sodium benzoate. So as we talk about formulations, I'm going to give you a lot of data and examples, and we have tons more data. So I'd encourage you to contact me after this talk and let me talk to you more about how we can potentially help you with your formulation. So here's a list of current mainstream preservatives, and I'm not going to go through this whole list, but I think it's important to point out things like DMDM, hydantoin, and parabens. These are on the list for the retailers. Great preservatives, but they have safety concerns, and so that is one reason they're struggling. The ITs are also very good preservatives, wide pH range. However, they're classified as skin sensitizers, and in Europe, if you use higher concentrations of these materials, you do have to label it. So sodium benzoate actually becomes a really good preservative. It's a good choice. You can use it anywhere from a pH of 2 to 7, and we can help you do that. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. It is a very good safety profile, good with green labels, and a pretty good cost structure. You also have other organic acids that you can now use too. So let's go back to this whole safety system I was talking about. You have to think about your full system when you think about creating a safety system, very similar to your car. So you need to think about plant hygiene and packaging first. If you don't have good plant hygiene, then you can introduce even small amounts of bacteria or mold. And what happens is those things grow. And so that's when you have a problem. So make sure you have really good plant hygiene. And then the next few slides, I'm going to take you through some hurdle technology to think about. Those multi-layers of safety protection, pH, water activity, bioburdens of ingredients. A lot of people these days want bio-based materials. They often come with a bioburden. So you have to think very carefully about that as you formulate and as you put your preservative system together. Packaging and types of materials. And I would say to you, I'm going to share some data with you, but you should always do your own efficacy testing because every formulation is different. And you have to make sure that your specific formulation is well protected. So what do I mean by multifunctionals? At Emerald, we think about multifunctionals as antimicrobial boosters that bring additional properties. It helps you with your label, so you can have something that boosts your antimicrobial, but that is also a surfactant that's required. Chelators are also good antimicrobials and boosters. And so that's what I mean by multifunctional. More than one property brought with your material. So whenever I meet with customers to talk to them about putting together a formulation, this is how I approach it. I talk to them first. You have to think about your preservation from the very beginning now. No longer can you put a formulation together and put a strong preservative in at the end and not worry about it. But think about your preservation from the beginning and how you're going to formulate with your preservation safety package. For organic acids, I got to tell you, lowering the pH and narrowing the pH specification for manufacturing is really important. It allows you to use less of your organic acid. We can get you up to a pH of 7, and I'm going to show you some data in a minute, but you're going to have to use more preservatives. So if you have the ability to lower pH, do it. Add preservative boosters such as chelating agents and multifunctionals. Also, select a surfactant that extends preservation efficacy. I should say to you, we have done quite a bit of work on how to boost the pKa of sodium benzoate. Sodium benzoate is very unique, and you can boost that pKa by using certain types of surfactant. I would love to share that information with you. So now what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through some data. I'm the kind of chemist that I like to see data because it helps me understand the problem. And then I can formulate based on the kind of data and what my current situation is. So here's a body wash base that we have, unpreserved, and you can see the various bacteria and mold growing at a pH of 6. So let's go back to that whole pH question. So if you are going to preserve this body wash at a pH of 6, to be efficacious, you're going to need 1% of Purox S sodium benzoate. However, if you would drop that pH to pH 4, you only need 0.2% of Purox S, because you need to remember that pH is a logarithmic scale. So just a slight change. I even tell customers, even if you can just move the pH down by 0.2 pH units, that really helps you. So think about how you can lower that pH from the very beginning. Then let's also think about how you could potentially use a multifunctional. And I'm going to talk to you about our Calama 3PP, which is a great multifunctional that really boosts the performance of sodium benzoate. It can't be used by itself, but it's great at boosting the performance of sodium benzoate. So at a pH of 6.5, we've increased the pH here. You can see that at 1% sodium benzoate at 6.5, we're struggling a little bit, especially with mold and E. coli. However, you add 0.2% of the Calama 3PP, there is this synergistic effect, and we'd be glad to take you through the data with sodium benzoate, and you end up getting a very efficacious solution. So let's move on to thinking about how you use a chelator potentially. So again, let's take that same solution, 1.5% of sodium benzoate at a pH of 6.5, high pH, and you add 0.5% of GLDA. And by the way, any chelants operate pretty similar to GLDA and the data that we have here. But again, we can share data with you if you're interested. And what you see is you have great control of your solution. So, in conclusion, think about your preservative system. It's a very important feature. I get really worried when I see preservative-free on various types of products, because you are, without a preservative safety system, you are opening yourself up to accidents. And accidents, as we all know, happen. So make sure that you have a really solid preservative safety system with multi-layers in place. You know, your preservative as formulators, your job is pretty tough because your preservative systems are shrinking. Think about how you put together that safety system and what kind of components will help you make sure your product is well formulated. And then finally, think about the prevention. Think about your plants and making sure your plants and your packaging have the right kind of components to give you a good safety system for preservation. And with that, that's my talk. We have lots more data. I'd love to talk to people if they're interested in contacting me, and we'd be glad to share data. I would say to you that Amber Yarnell, who is our expert on applications, is great to talk to. So thanks so much, Perry.
Well, thank you, Rosanna. And we had a few questions going on, and we have a few minutes for questions. So let me get right to the questions that came out. And first of all, I'm really surprised to hear sodium benzoate can be used at a high pH like that. In fact, Chiara asked, how is it possible that sodium benzoate works at around pH of 7? Or does that work? Is that something that was misheard or something?
No, it works at a pH of 7. And what we do is you use it, and this is really important because pKa is dependent on the environment that the material is in. So when we talk about a pKa of 4.2, that's a pKa of 4.2 in water. However, when you add surfactants to it, that's a totally different situation. And you have micelle involvement and things like that. And so you can actually boost the pKa from 4.2 to over 5, depending on the type of surfactant you're using. And we validated that. I'd love to share the data. It's pretty exciting, actually.
Yeah.
We validated that by looking at carbon-13 NMR and seeing the increase in benzoic acid. So we feel pretty confident, and we have really solid data on this.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Okay, some other quick questions. I think Yana asked, is sodium benzoate registered or is allowed as a preservative for home care products in Germany or Europe?
It is. We are BPR approved. So it's definitely, it took a lot of effort, but we're there. Both in, I would say both in Europe and in the US. EPA, FIFRA approved too.
Erwin wanted to know, what is the INCI name for 3PP?
It is phenylpropanol.
Phenylpropanol. Okay. And then let's see, we've got enough time for this one. How do you use sodium benzoate or any other of the organic acids in an emulsion system? Does the ionic nature of these materials cause destabilization to emulsions?
It's all about order of addition and thinking about your micelles, and that's where I don't have time to completely go through it. I would suggest you talk to our application scientists. They have all kinds of tricks. They really understand this. For years, we've been doing lots of work around how to incorporate sodium benzoate into emulsions. So we'd be glad to help you.
And just one final question. Sodium benzoate, it best replaces which of the traditional preservatives, like parabens, formaldehyde donors, that kind of thing? Which is the best replacement for?
It can replace all of them. It's more about the pH. I will tell you, I say a pH of 2 to 7. And once you get up to that pH of 7, we're going to have trouble. So we can boost the pKa. We're looking for other ways to boost pKa, but we can boost the pKa to get to a pH of 7. So it's more about the pH range rather than what you're replacing. But you can replace anything in those pH ranges.
Well, Rosanna, thank you so much. We will invite you back later for the afterwards discussion, and maybe we'll get to some of the questions that were sent in. But let's bring on our next presenter. Yes, fascinating stuff. Thank you, everybody who had questions. And just a tip to you, if you had a question, if you got it in earlier, it was more likely to get answered. The later questions, we just don't have time at the moment. But get those questions in as soon as they occur to you, and I'll try to get them on. Coming on with us now is David Steinberg. David? There's David. Hello, David.
Hi, Perry.
David has been sporting the beard since the last time I saw him. Well, welcome. It's the pandemic beard. Okay. Well,
Absolutely.
David Steinberg received his BS in chemistry from Drexel University and his MBA from Pace University. He founded the master's degree program in cosmetic science at Fairleigh Dickinson University, excellent program, and he taught there for 18 years. He has served as president of the American Society of Cosmetic Chemists, and he has been named a fellow in the SCC and in the Regulatory Affairs Profession Society. He is the author of the book Preservatives for Cosmetics, and ask him how you can get a copy. He founded Steinberg and Associates Incorporated, a consulting company dealing with the chemistry and regulations of cosmetics and non-prescription drugs in 1995. 2021 will be his last year as president of the company, and he will be turning the company over to 2 employees and then promoting himself up to the title of founder. Well, welcome, David. Thank you so much for participating, and we're looking forward to your talk about how preservatives are used in cosmetics and how they're currently regulated. I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Perry. I hope I'm doing this correctly. I'm going to be going through a lot of slides. Some of them are going to be on the screen for about a second or two, because I understand you're all getting copies of them, and they're there more for informational purposes than for anything else. So with that, let's talk about how preservatives are regulated. What happened to there we go. There are basically 3 different ways countries regulate preservatives. The FDA in the United States prohibits preservatives. They don't pre-approve any preservatives when we're talking about cosmetics. The European Union and countries that follow the European Union have a list on Annex 5 of permitted preservatives. This leads to some interesting comments. And Canada has what's called a hot list, which is sort of halfway between. They have restricted preservatives or prohibited preservatives. However, we got a new kid on the block who's regulating preservatives, and that's the public. They have a whole group of public perceptions, cosmetic brands, retail stores, advertising. They're all impacting what we can and cannot use. United States, the FDA, going back probably before most of you were born, prohibited hexachlorophene and mercury, giving very severe restrictions. No one uses them. They prohibited biethanol and halogenated salicylamide. They were prohibited before I got into the cosmetic industry in the 60s. So none of them are used. But also in the United States, we have state laws, and that is a major problem. Maine, Minnesota, New York, Oregon, Vermont, and the state of Washington all regulate children's products and say what can and cannot go into them. and this has caused major issues. They don't define children all the same. Sometimes children are 5 years old, 8 years old, 12 years old, so it becomes rather complex. Fortunately, we can work around and have one product for them. California has unique issues, and that is that ingredients are required to trigger, or if you have them, trigger registrations. Not approvals, but registration. And then we have Prop 65 or Proposition 65, which mandates warnings. Again, it's not a prohibition, it is a warning. So we look over and let's talk about Prop 65. It was passed as a populism ballot initiative called the Safe Drinking Water and Toxic Enforcement Act of 1986. Who's against safe drinking water? No one. So this passed. Actually, it had very little to do with safe drinking water. What it required was the state of California to come up with a list of chemicals that are known to cause cancer or birth defects or reproductive harms, and they require businesses to notify or inform Californians about exposure to the chemicals. And this has been triggered into what are now warnings, and the organization OEHA, we never like to spell it out, promulgates the chemicals which trigger the warnings. Well, 2 years ago, or I guess it's 3 years ago now, new warnings went into effect. And the warnings are required to be on where exposure can take place. And there's the yellow triangle with the exclamation point, the word warnings in all caps, and it says the product can expose you to chemicals, including, and here you must list the chemicals in your product which are on the list, which are known to the state of California to cause cancer and birth defects or other reproductive harms. And for more information, go to this website. There's an abbreviated one for product packaging only, but that's not going to help you. Well, who enforces Prop 65? And this is where the fun begins. It's officially the responsibility of the Attorney General of the state of California. This is then subdivided to any district attorney or city attorney of cities with population over 750,000. But the real nightmare is the fact that any individual in the state of California can seek enforcement of this by filing lawsuits. Okay, and the Attorney General's office and district attorneys, I can probably count on my 10 fingers the number of times they have looked to enforce Prop 65. It's the nightmare of the consumers and the lawyers who make a living filing these nuisance lawsuits that scares you and needs to cause the problem. The law states that you can be fined $2,500 per day for violation, but that's per item of commerce. So if you think about that, the number of products that you sell, the number of days that you're involved in this turns out to be a huge amount of money. And if you as a consumer sue, you're entitled to 25% of the fine. It's a great way to make a living. And the big people who sue this are lawyers. They go after people in a pecking order of the retail seller first. The retail seller is going to go after the company on the label. The company on the label goes after the producer, and finally they go after the ingredient suppliers and you. Everyone gets dragged into this. Now, there are exceptions, and they are called safe harbor limits. The nightmare for formulators and for cosmetic chemists and for anyone actually who's involved in this is that the safe harbor limits are based on exposure. Everyone calls me up and says, okay, what's the maximum amount of XYZ I can have in my product? No, you don't answer that by the percent. You have to explain what is the exposure to the product. Most of the cases filed by these lawyers are settled out of court because it's too expensive to litigate this. There have been times that we've actually fought them. And the biggest one that you'll be familiar with was that titanium dioxide, the most common pigment used in cosmetics and for other uses, that one actually went to court. Again, I'm going to emphasize it. exposure limits. Now, what happens if there is no safe harbor? You can determine your own safe harbor limits. However, in order to do this, you're going to have to do a lot of testing. It becomes very expensive. And of course, your nightmare is the biggest fear is the letter from lawyers who make a living filing these letters. The lawyer's knowledge of chemistry is somewhere between slim and none. So they will file suits against you simply because they see a inky name on your ingredient listing, which is on the Prop 65 list. That doesn't mean the chemical is actually present. In fact, that's a lot of fun on my consulting work. Okay, here are the chemicals on Prop 65 that you have to be aware of. Methanol. Methanol is found in formalin. It's a byproduct. It's found in formalin basically to stabilize the formalin. The United States alcohols of SD1, 3A, and 30 all contain methanol. Plus, you'll find methanol in trace levels in fatty acids, alcohols, esters, et cetera, et cetera. Boric acid, which I don't think we use at all, but the one you have to deal with now is 1,4-dioxane. 1,4-dioxane is a byproduct of ethoxylation. So anything that is made via ethoxylation can have 1,4-dioxane. From the preservative standpoint, phenoxyethanol is the one you have to worry about. Also on Prop 65, orthophenolphenol and its sodium salt, mercury and mercury compounds. We don't use them anymore. We haven't used mercury to preserve cosmetics in 45 years because we have better and safer preservatives. And they were only allowed when nothing else worked. So that disappeared. The California Safe Cosmetic Act of 2005 is known as COSCA. We like to abbreviate things. And basically, it requires you to register your cosmetic product with the state of California if it contains a listed chemical, and they have a list of, I think, 700 chemicals, as an ingredient. So trace contaminants don't count. And on the list, which are or could be used as ingredients, again, are formaldehyde solutions, orthophenolphenol, mercury. That's rarely the problem, but there are a lot of ingredients that are used that are not preservatives that show up on this list. Probably the two biggest, titanium dioxide's on this list, although it has, because of the lawsuits that were won by industry, there are restrictions, which we're talking about preservation, so I won't go into them. The other one is retinol and retinol esters. So they're the big issues you deal with. Okay, what does Canada do? They have their hot list. They're broken up into two categories: prohibited ingredients. They should not be present in a product sold in Canada. The only preservative that's on that prohibited list, again, is good old mercury and its compounds. And restricted ingredients are permitted only if the conditions of use or cautionary statements are met. So you have to look this up. The other factor that Canada has that the United States does not have, Europe has that the United States doesn't have, all chemicals that enter the environment of Canada must comply with the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. The exemption for a chemical is up to 100 kilos. That's not 100 kilos by supplier, by end use, by any other criteria. It's 100 kilos. And when that magic number of 100 kilos is met by combinations or by one company or by a manufacturer or exports, it doesn't make any difference. Now you have to have registrations under SEPA. So that causes headaches. If you do it right and spend the time, you can do the testing for SEPA and the same testing that's required for REACH in Europe. So you want to think about this if you're going to be selling the product or using it worldwide. Here's a list of the preservatives that are restricted in Canada. You can look up whatever you need to because they all have limitations. European Union, God bless them. Annex 2 is their prohibited ingredients. One of my pet peeves in life. And I've listed the actual numbers. The 348 to 52 are the 4 old chemicals that the FDA prohibited in the 50s. 1374 to 78 is my pet peeve in life with the European Union: isopropyl, isobutyl, phenyl, benzyl, and pentylparabens. Now, I testified and went to the meetings of the SCCS defending isopropyl and isobutyl paraben. Phenyl, benzyl, and pentylparabens haven't been used in cosmetics in my lifetime, but isopropyl and isobutyl parabens were. And I presented a significant amount of safety data and information, and their comments were, we want these tests. And the tests that they wanted were somewhere at least 10 times the annual, would cost at least 10 times the annual sales of the isopropyl and isobutyl parabens. We went back over here. I just want to be sure there was nothing else. Yeah, there are a couple. Here we go. Back again. Okay. Annex 5 in Europe is the list of preservatives which are permitted with their levels and warnings. Getting on Annex 5, I can again send you the information of what is required. All has to do with safety. It never considers whether they work or not. So there are a lot of preservatives on Annex 5 which we don't use because they don't function. They don't serve any preservation needs. The United States has a different issue now, and that is the inspector from the FDA's manual, and they have made these suggestions. If these preservatives are used, that's fairly well known. The FDA is familiar with them. Go on to your next inspection problem. But these are the newer preservatives or products or mixtures that are offered, and the FDA has serious questions when this is being used to preserve your product. Here's another group of these plant extracts, which are, quote, natural preservatives. The problem with these, and the FDA says they're the problem, and I say they're a problem, and anyone who works with them says they're a problem. How do you know they have the same microbiological action from batch to batch? How do you know what they contain? I got to go back again. Many of these natural preservatives that I've seen in the market, having been analyzed, contain real preservatives. And when asked about this, they said, well, they're in there to preserve the preservative. Huh? What are you talking about? That makes no sense. Okay, so what have companies done to get around spending all the safety testing money? They say these new chemicals are not preservatives. They're boosters. They have other reasons there, and they just incidentally work that way. They fall into two categories, really. They really are preservatives, but the vendors just won't spend the money to do all the required safety testing for the European Union, which requires this. They are solvents, and let's be realistic about it. If the preservatives are not water soluble, you've got to put it in the right solvents. So water activity is also something which happens. Probably one of the most popular preservatives now is cap glycol or caprylic glycol. Caprylic glycol is not sold as caprylic glycol. It is manufactured and sold in tank cars or tank wagons. It's very difficult to handle. So it is always offered and has been offered to the cosmetic industry, pre-dissolved in things like phenoxyethanol, the different glycols, things like this. Okay, this is a list of frequency of use, which preservatives were used in 2010 and 2020. What is happening with this? And this is for your own information. Why did this happen? Well, all preservatives are considered bad by a lot of people. Darby's publication on parabens caused breast cancer, which she retracted that paper. Started the paraben-free movement. The Environmental Working Group, the EWG, attacked baby products as a way to increase the solicitation of money, and they called this the toxic tub. They threatened companies that if you don't do what they want you to do, they will toxic tub you. So we saw a decline of parabens. We saw France continuing to try getting phenoxyethanol restricted. Probably the two which really where of greatest concern. Methyl isothiazolone and iodopropanyl butylcarbamate basically have disappeared from use, not because there were safety issues, as the governments used to say. It's because we put too much into our product. We use 2 to 3 or 4 times the effective level, which significantly increase sensitizations. So be careful when you're looking at preservatives as to what levels are needed. Formaldehyde got killed by the Brazilian blowout, which resulted in all sorts of complex questions as to what formaldehyde is. The word formaldehyde represents an anhydrous gas. If you put it in, and it combines with water, that is what is usually referred to as methylene glycol or formalin. Totally different chemicals. Okay, what are we using now? Well, let's look at it. Benzoyl alcohol. If you remember looking at your benzoyl alcohol, you'll see that it's a sensitizer, and it's on that allergen list from the European Union. Cap glycol, becoming more and more sensitizer. Also, it doesn't work on fungi and in surfactant solutions. So that really means it's used in emulsions. And if you look at the chemical structure, it's a 1,2-diol with a long oil-soluble tail. We call them emulsifiers. So how you apply it and how you add it is critical. Phenoxyethanol, besides the 1,4-dioxane. Let's go back to sorbic acid and benzoic acid. But sorbic acid was a favorite antifungal product that I used back in the 60s because it was the use of it as an antifungal agent, and they used it at higher levels. It became an allergen, and although it was still used, it was virtually killed off. It was only used in rinse-off products. And then when the parabens died, suddenly potassium sorbate and sorbic acid became very popular again. You need to understand this is an unsaturated acid. You need antioxidants, so it will turn yellow. Natural preservatives, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. But now, what about new preservatives? All new preservatives that we've come up with in the cosmetic industry in the past 40 years have come from industrial applications. The cost of safety and testing is just too high. Also, we don't use much. If you look at some of the new preservatives that are used industrial, they spill more in one day than we would ever use in a year in every cosmetic in the world. We're just not a big market. The latest one that has come back or come to the industry was approved in the European Union is from food and flavor industry. It adds an aroma. It would be considered a fragrance. All fragrances are under attack. But the big problem is it's not water soluble. So we'll go back to my favorite comment. Why do we use a preservative like cap glycol, which is not approved as a preservative because they don't want to run the safety testing, instead of using products that have had over 100 years of safety testing? Answer, talk to your marketing department. So we know what preservatives are. This came from the FDA's handbook, which I read in 1969. Preservatives are added to clean products to prevent deterioration by consumers under normal and foreseeable use. Really? Do you believe that? Nonsense. 5 more minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
Nonsense. Preservatives are added to products because we have GMP failures in the manufacturing of our products. If you believe that consumers contaminate cosmetics, how do you prove it? It's nonsense. Let's face facts. I said this, I was teaching the FDA back around 20 years ago, and I brought this up, and there were about 400 people in the auditorium, and what I said was heresy, and I offered to not accept the honorarium they giving me to speak and teach if they didn't agree with me. So, why? It's real simple. Look how we check things. We use pure strains. Do you have pure strains of bacteria on your skin? We use house organisms for our challenge testing. I always like to call up Estee Lauder and say, send me a slant of your house organism. How do you know if your preservative is working? or you're manufactured under CGMPs at the end of the batch. There's no contamination. Was it the preservative or was it your good boys and followed GMPs? The FDA calls a contaminated finished product a preservative failure. We never got it to a consumer. How can it be a preservative failure? And the FDA, of course, rejects treatment of your contaminated batch. Okay, so what do you do? And now this is really the most important comments that I'm going to tell you. Manufacture under strictly enforced GMPs. If you don't use HACCP, you got to. I want to go back a second. Package your products so consumers can't contaminate them. Unit doses, never a problem. Okay. And finally, let's go to where we are. We see recalls because of contaminated cosmetics. Why? Because you shipped contaminated cosmetics. So the answer is simple. Never ship a product that's contaminated. How difficult is it? Well, why is it shipped? And the answer is very simple. First, I want to go back to HACCP. HACCP stands for Hazardous Analysis Critical Control Point. Please understand it. I can teach you about it if you want. The classical answer that I always get, why did you ship a contaminated product? I know my preservative system's working and it's going to kill all the bugs off. Marketing needs the stuff shipped immediately. Those are the two big no-nos. Just don't do it. Preservative efficacy testing really is not the answer because you need to decide whether your product is a typical cosmetic or an atypical cosmetic. And you have the slides so you know exactly what that means. Now I want to just bounce to the conclusions. Regulators and regulations have failed in regulating cosmetics and preservatives. Companies get away with unproven and negative claims. The NGAs get away with junk science. So my final conclusion is maybe we really ought to start everything all over again. Throw out all the regulations of preservatives, come up with things that really make sense, and come up with testing methods which really make sense to protect the consumers. And with that, that should be, let's put this one up. This is the important one. If you need to contact me, use my email address. This is an incorrect phone number. And with that, I thank you. And Perry, if there are questions, let me know.
Much for that. A fascinating topic. And we got a lot of questions. We've only got a couple of minutes, so we'll get to some that I think could be pretty quick. Mark wants to know, while the FDA has a list of prohibited materials, where does the EPA's list of safer chemicals ingredient list fit in? Like, how does the EPA have any regulations with cosmetic preservatives?
The answer is absolutely none. In fact, this leads to the question, there are a lot of preservatives that are allowed in non-FDA regulated uses, and the vice versa. Mm-hmm. If you look at cosmetic preservatives, a lot of them are not allowed in industrial applications. There was a great recall from a shampoo in which they were using a preservative, and they decided that they were going to sell it as an pet shampoo. Well, pet shampoos are regulated by the EPA, not the FDA, and the FDA made them recall it. Before your time, Perry.
Indeed. Mark had a question. Who's the regulators for Asia and the Middle East?
Okay. Asia, you have basically 4 different types of regulations. You have a consortium called ASEAN, which is sort of like the European Union of 10 countries in the Far East. Japan marches to their own drummer, as does China, and Australia and New Zealand have their own different sets of regulations. And most of them, you're going to see that they're following the European Union positive list of preservatives, which gives them a lot of products which don't work, but that's the way things are now. The Middle East has tried to organize They march to different drummers, but since the Middle East major market for their products is the European Union, they follow the European Union regulations.
Okay, I think we have time for one more. Suppose a preservative is used in a raw material, like you're buying a surfactant. Do you have to put that ingredient on your ingredient list?
The answer to that is it in your finished product at a level in which it's functional? So if you're buying sodium lauryl sulfate, which is preserved with 0.2% formaldehyde, and
Yeah.
you're diluting this 10-to-1 or 5-to-1 to make your shampoo, is formaldehyde functioning at that level? And the answer is no. So therefore, it's not considered a cosmetic ingredient.
Well,
It doesn't prevent you from getting into trouble for having formaldehyde present if it's prohibited.
Right. So that, like Prop 65, you'd have to list that maybe.
Yes. Yep.
Right. Of course, if you embrace homeopathy, then everything always works, right?
Right.
All right, David. Well, thank you so much. I think that comes to our time for our next speaker. But thank you. David will be back later at the end if there's time to answer some of these questions. We had a bunch. Some people have asked about the recording. You'll get an email out about the recording later. But indeed, this is being recorded. And if you were one of those people whose sound wasn't working, don't worry. The sound will work. Okay, Donald, you're up next.
Hello, Perry, and
Hello.
good morning to everybody.
Let me just introduce you here. Donald English is the graduated summa cum laude from the University of Charleston with a Bachelor's of Science degree in biology and a Master of Science degree from North Carolina State University at Raleigh in microbiology with a minor in biochemistry. He has over 40 years of experience at the bench and managerial levels in industrial microbiology and has worked in the research and development and quality control microbiology laboratories at Avon Products, GlaxoSmithKline, Consumer Healthcare, and Merck and Company. He is currently a consultant that provides consulting services to cosmetic and personal care, dietary supplements, and the pharmaceutical industries. He has extensive knowledge in the following areas, which is why we brought him on: how to adequately preserve products, formulations using both traditional and non-traditional preservative systems. He has expertise in critical GMP auditing of quality control, testing laboratories, and a few other expertise to contact him. Today, he is going to be talking to us about the non-traditional and alternative preservatives that you can use in cosmetics. All right, are you ready, Donald?
Yes, I am.
All right.
All right. All right. Mostly is that why we're getting into this issue about using alternative preservatives is because we have claims today due from marketing. We want preservative-free, paraben-free, formaldehyde-free, but also too is that we want to have products naturally preserved. Okay. All right. Now, it is not easy to replace a traditional preservative with alternative preservative because it's not a one-to-one replacement. And also, too, most people do not realize that by switching out the traditional preservatives with alternative preservatives, you might have an increase in the cost of the formulation. However, you also need to know that you also need to repeat the testing on the product formulation containing this alternative system, like this challenge testing, allergy testing, and claims testing. Now, alternative preservatives generally will have activity by themselves. It's usually an ingredient marketed for some other function with a traditional preservative, and it can also boost the antimicrobial activity of a traditional preservative, which at a lower concentration can be used, and it also allows you to switch to less powerful types of preservatives. Regulatory aspects, okay, like I said, they have activity, but generally, for the most part, they're not on an approved preservative list, such as Annex 5, the Japanese positive preservative list, and the Cosmetic Ingredient Review. Now, some of the functions that these alternative preservatives are really used in the formulations, they are used as antioxidants, emollients, fragrance additives, humectants, moisturizer, skin and hair conditioner, and viscosity regulators. In this slide here, I listed all different types, and this is what I'm going to cover today, the different types of chemicals and ingredients that can be used as preservatives. Now, for glycols in cosmetics, we are using about 7 different glycols in product formulations to preserve formulations, and this is a list of them. And going deeper, propylene glycol and butylene glycol, they function as a solvent, but they're known to be preservative potentiators, and they do have activity. For example, propylene glycol between 10 and 20%, and butylene glycol 5 to 20%. And they also function by being amactant by lowering the water activity of the formulation. Generally, propylene glycol is water miscible, but butylene glycol is not, but it is soluble in alcohol. So normally you add these glycols into the water phase of the formulation. Generally, the usage concentration of these 2 glycols is between 3 and 6%. And however, you should note that at higher concentrations, let's say, for example, propylene glycol greater than 20 and butylene glycol greater than 10% will have antimicrobial activity and will self-preserve a formulation. Pentylene glycol, or 1,2-pentanol, can be a skin moisturizer, emulsion stabilizer, antimicrobial, and solvent. It's soluble both in water and oil. You incorporate it into the water phase, and the recommended use concentration is between 1 to 5%. And it does have a broad spectrum activity, and I included here some MIC data for pentylene glycol on this slide. Okay, let me see here. Sorry. All right. This ingredient is soluble in water. It's stable in high-low pH. Recommended use concentration is 3%. And it will also enhance the activity of parabens, phenoxidone, and formaldehyde. And so this caproglycol will work in your formulations. This glycol can work, it be used both in 0.5 to 1% rinse off and rinse leave on formulations, has a pH range of 2 to 10, has good activity against bacteria but weak against mold. So it's commonly used in blends with traditional preservatives and also EDTA, and it's very water soluble. However, it can cause destabilization of emulsion, so you need to either increase the concentration of the emulsifier or mix with a different emulsifier, depending on such as non-ionic and anionic emulsifiers. And now caproglycol here is that it can cause eye area stinging issues or numbing in the lip areas. You should be aware of that. Okay. All right, this one here can be a preservative booster, antimicrobial activity, moisturizer, and deodorant. It can be foam and viscosity booster. It can work against P. acnes. It's known to enhance activity of other preservatives. And decaglycol can be used in combination with other ingredients. And recommended concentration is either between 0.1 to 2%. And, however, it's very water insoluble, but is soluble in cosmetic ester. So that's how you add it to the formulation. Propylene diol 1,3 is a preservative booster, a solvent, humectant, and skin moisturizer. It is water miscible. It can boost the activity of preservatives, but the recommended concentration in a formula is between 1 to 5%, and it is pH independent. Now, caproglycerol ether is an alkylglycerin ether. It's a natural biolipid made from vegetable oils and glycerin. It can serve as an emollient, foam boosting surfactant. It can also be a broad spectrum preservative booster and a deodorant active. And generally, it's used in between a concentration of 0.2 to 1%. However, it should be noted it has more potent antifungal activity than antibacterial, and it does have a wide pH range from 2 to 12, and it's moderately soluble in water. Glycerin esters, there's several of them that we use in the cosmetic industry, and here's 5 of them listed here. Going further, ethylhexylglycerin. It's a preservative booster, enhancer of phenoxyethanol and methylparaben. And you can also improve the activity of caprylglycol or pentylene glycol. Generally, it's used between 0.1 to 1%. Recommended pH it can be used between 2 to 12. It has less than 0.2% water solubility, but it has good solubility in organic solvents such as alcohol, glycols, and glycol ethers. However, it is incompatible with ethoxylated surfactants, and it does serve as a booster, deodorizing agent, and mild humectant. Just to let you know, I have worked with a client that it was using ethyl hexaglycerin, and they had the wrong order of addition, that they were just adding it into the water phase, and it wasn't doing anything. So I had to recommend them to actually dissolve it in a glycol, then add it, and then our preservative issues went away. So sometimes when you're coming across these things, it's very, very difficult. Now, glycerol caparate does have good antimicrobial activity against positive bacilli, gram-negative bacteria, and yeast. And also boost activity of preservatives. And the recommended use is concentration formulation is between 1 and 2%. And it can be used between a pH of 4.5 to 7. And you can either add it to the oil phase or the water phase at less than 80 degrees and less than the pH 7, because pH is greater than 7 will hydrolyze this impact. And it is has deodorant activity, antimicrobial activity, and it's a moisturizer. Glycerol caprylate is also good against gram-positive bacteria and gram-negative bacteria, but does have the lack of activity against fungi, and usually is used in conjunction with P-acinic acid in product formulations. However, it is water insoluble. The recommended concentration in formulas generally is 0.3 to 0.7. pH range is 4 to 7, and you need to add to the water or oil phase before emulsification. And it's very not temperature tolerant. You have to be used at less than 60. And it does have limited anti-activity in surfactant formulations. Glycerol unilate is often used in a blend with glycerol caprylate. You need to use in formulations below 7 due because of the hydrolysis caprylate. The blend is water insoluble. It does have broad spectrum of activity, and it's used between 1 and 1.5%, and usually used in water and oil, or oil in water emulsions, and should be used during the added during the emulsification phase. Methylhepaglycerin is a preservative booster, odor control agent, and anti-soaping ingredient. It does boost the activity of preservatives against bacteria and yeast. So it needs to be used in conjunction with a preservative that has activity against mold. It's water soluble. Generally, it's between 1 and 1.5. The pH range is 4 to 8, and it is recommended for use as surfactant-based product formulations and emulsions. Oops, what happened here? Okay, sorry. Essential oils, okay? You do see this in a lot of products today. They do have antimicrobial activity, and examples of some of the essential oils that have activity I listed here is cinnamon, clove, eucalyptus, lavender, orange, tea tree oil, thyme, rosemary, and lemongrass. And generally, that in the literature, the antimicrobial activity of essential oils will vary between different essential oils, and I gave you examples here of different oils that's shown that they're not all equal. Tea tree oil is an essential oil. The composition of this essential oil is complex. It's water insoluble. You need to pre-dissolve it in polysorbate 20. Use concentration is 1 to 5%, but there's a lot of problem issues in using tea tree oil. One thing, it has an odor of turpentine, has weak antimicrobial activity, is a known skin sensitizer, and in 2008, the SCCP issued an opinion that there is no clear cosmetic function for this ingredient. Let's see, I think I might have hit this. So formulation problems using essential oil. They often will provide a mild to strong odor to the formulation. Generally, they're not soluble in water. They also may impart a yellow color to the formulation, and at high levels, they could cause sensitization. But the main thing that the problem with the using essential oils is that they contain ingredients or sub-ingredients that are listed on the EU allergen list. And listed here is some of the essential oils that are out in the marketplace. You can look at this later because I know you're getting the slides. And there's other phytochemicals with anti-activity like terpenoids, flavonoids, and phenolic compounds. For example, phenolic is eugenol, and caffeic acid, and methanol, and capsaicin is also activity. Flavors and flavor enhancers. This is starting to become more popular. Water-soluble flavors and flavor contribute to activity of the formulation. They're generally effective against fungi around a pH of 6. Examples of flavors and flavor agents that have activity is ethyl vanillin, this is synthetic vanillin, and maltol. Plant extracts. There's several of them out in the marketplace. One is the aspen bark extract powder. It's water soluble. It's generally used between 0.2 to 3%. It's very heat stable. It's used in formulations with a pH of 3 to 8. However, it should be noted it contains about 54 to 60% salicylate, and it's a monthly functional and skin conditioning agent. Another plant extract is black currant powder. It's also water soluble, 1 to 3%. It's very heat stable, and it's an ingredient that's also an antimicrobial and skin conditioning agent. Okay, this one is I call one that has a lot of controversy. It's the honeysuckle flower extract. It is water soluble, has a broad spectrum of activity, recommending up to 1%. It contains a pH, can be used in pH of 3 to 8. It's very heat stable. It's also an antimicrobial, astringent, and skin conditioning agent. However, there's several compositional issues with this thing. One thing is the antimicrobial active of this ingredient is unknown. The supplier says that it's a natural paraben, but no parabens or para-hydroxybenzoic acid has ever been found in it. However, in some batches, a small amount of benzoic acid has been found. However, it does contain a flavonoid, and I suspect that the flavonoid is the one that's causing the antimicrobial activity. So you have to be aware of this. Another ingredient is elderberry OS. It's insoluble in water. It's an antioxidant, anti-conditioning, and antimicrobial. It contains several following phytochemicals here, which I listed out. Generally, the recommended use concentration is 1 to 5%, and the pH is 3 to 5, and it has temperature stability less than 75 degrees. Another one that's coming popular, you'll see, is Magnolia officinalis bark extract. It contains manganol and hecanol. It can be a skin conditioning agent, antioxidant, and antimicrobial. It has very good activity against yeast and mold. However, it does have moderate activity against bacteria, so generally it will be used in conjunction with a preservative or an alternate that has activity against bacteria. It's only soluble in oil, and the optimum pH is 3 to 9. Another one that's coming popular is Humulus lupus or hops extract. It's known as a preservative booster. It's used with phenopropanol in a blend, and I listed the blend. Can be used in leave-on and leave-off products, soluble in water. pH is good, and the use concentration is between 0.2 and 2%.
Don, I just wanted to give you the 5-minute heads up.
I'm going to go through a lot of this real quick.
Okay.
6 seed extracts that contain essential oils. Another one is a tea tree lichen extract. It contains ucinic acid. Okay. Superin is another plant extract mostly being used. Essential oil mixtures, there's one called neopin that's out there, and it's already there. There's peptides like leucostock radish ferment extract is out there that can be used. However, it can be incompatible with certain ingredients. Peptide E-polylysine is mostly used in food as food preservative. It's very heat stable. It's a fermentation product. Organic acids, I'm not going to go through the traditional, but there's about 6 different alternative preservatives for organic acids out there. And this, just going through this, copper hydroxide acid is derived from coconut oil. I listed the different properties here. Capric acid is found also in coconut oil, has good antifungal activity. I listed the conditions of use. Simonic acid is very insoluble in water and soluble in ethanol. It has very good fungal activity, so it needs to be used with an alternative. Lemonitic acid is very water soluble, but you'll see it mostly used in combination with phenylpropanol or other ingredients. And this one is obtained from fatty castor oil. It's very soluble. Fragrance additives like a phenyl ethyl alcohol and phenylpropanol, and there's a couple blends of they're out there. I listed here in the slide with phenyl ethyl alcohol. It's a fragrance additive. However, it's weak against fungi, but needs to be used with something else. Phenylpropanol is a very natural ingredient. It's very active against gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria and fungi. So it's mostly used in blends of alternative preservatives. Here's a trade name of preservative blend. I just listed here so you'll be aware of it. Here's another one, naticide. It has odor of almond and vanilla, but however, it does have essential oils. There's a ketone out there, hydroacetophenone. It's very good. Use concentrates up to 1%. Preservative booster. These are phospholipids that are out there you can use out there in the formulations. Okay. Going further. Now, conditions for use. Okay, one thing you have to look at the formulation factors, the spectrum of activity, process conditions, irritation and sensitivity, cost implications. You have to look at, also one of the things you need to look at is compatibility with other raw ingredients. For example, like I previously discussed, that caproglycols cannot be used with non-ionic surfactants, ethyl-hexylglycerin with ethoxylate surfactants. And also the phospholipids will have are incompatible with carbapol and phenylethyl alcohol and the blend there. Strong oxidants can cause degradation. One thing you need to look at when you're using these alternative preservatives are the spectrum of activity, okay, MIC and MLC. I gave you an example here showing here that comparing caproglycol and the botanical extract. You can see caproglycol is pretty much active, but you look at the botanical extract, it doesn't have very good activity against mold. Chelating agents, okay, should be used with them. There's been a lot of controversy about using ETA today, but people are using like lactic acid, citric acid, phytic acid in combination with these to increase their activity. Antioxidants, I listed the type of oxidants that are commonly used. Okay, one thing with process conditions, you need to look at the order of addition, the pH effects. Okay, a high pH can degrade them, and temperature. Not all are temperature compatible. Okay, you have to really look at those things. Okay, and one thing you need to do is do challenge testing. You need to do an initial sample and artificial age to see that the alternative preservative is actually active throughout the intended shelf life of the product. Okay, and coming to the end, you also need to look at irritation sensitivity issues. You need to repeat your irritation, like acute, cumulative, and photoirritation and sensitization when you use these preservatives, because or compound, because a lot of times people don't know. So conclusions is that our new options are for preserving formulations. However, you need to consider many factors for using these compounds in a formulation. So finally, I want to say thank you. And this is my staff of my company. So if you need to get in touch with me, my email and phone number is here. I know I rushed it, but I do know that I did provide a lot of good information for you so that you have that and you can download the presentation. Other than that, you're free to contact me.
Well, thanks, Don. That was a ton of information there, and be sure to download the slides to get some of the stuff there. We did have a few questions. We have a few minutes here. So here's the first question. It wasn't mentioned, but I see this often asked by my audience. And Sally wants to know, can silver serve to be an alternative preservative? You know, you see silver all the time, colloidal
Yes.
silver and that thing. That's
Yes.
not listed as a preservative, or what do you think as alternative?
All right. One of the problems I didn't list it there is that there's an environmental issue with the silver going into the environment. So high levels will kill certain fish. So I try to steer away from the silver because of that issue. Okay. I mean, I do know that people do use it, and I do know that silver is used in some antiperspirant ingredients products today.
Scott wanted to know, are the boosters that you talked about, are they regulated in any way in personal care? For example, do they have to have some other function if you're putting it in there? And do you know anything about whether they're regulated in the EU or anything?
Most of the boosters are not regulated anywhere. And generally, when you put a function of an ingredient, you're putting it down as an amactin or something else in there. You're not saying preservative activity. That's one of the things like David got into a little bit with caproglycol. Everybody's using it as a preservative, but you're putting it in there as an amactin. Okay. But no one, I call it the dirty little secret of formulating with these compounds. You're using it for something else, but you're claiming it as another function.
Right.
Ingredient.
Brett wanted to know, he said, some of the ingredients that you mentioned have antimicrobial activity, but do these ingredients have antimicrobial data, or is this some of this just proposed, or is these things that have been kind of validated?
Some of these things do have data. What I presented here is I had data, which I can't share because it belongs to another company now, but MIC and MLC testing proved that it does have activity. I saw the broad, the spectrum of activity, and a lot of manufacturers will test against the 5 USP indicators for the AE test to show the activity where you can get it. But however, I did a little bit more extensive. I did against 20 different organisms, got a broader picture, but a lot of the manufacturers will have MIC or MLC test data in their sales literature.
All right, Don. Well, thank you so much. There were a ton more questions, but I want to make sure we have time maybe at the end for some of the other questions. And so let's bring on our next speakers. We've got 2 speakers coming on. Let's see. So, there's me. Oh, technology. I hope you're having fun here. There's a lot of info in that last presentation, and be sure to download the slides. If you're having any problem downloading the slides, I have no help for you, but perhaps TKS does. Okay, we've got our speakers coming on. First up is, actually, they're going to be speaking together. So there's going to be 2 speakers. Andrea Malta Gliata has several years of experience in the cosmetic field. He works today in Roll Me HPC as the personal care market manager, as recognized, and many years of experience in the cosmetic field, has already demonstrated that he is an expert in this topic. Federica Garavaliga, I got to practice my Italian, but is graduated in biology with a master's in cosmetic science. After many years in the world of university research, she joined Roll Me HPC in 2016 as a cosmetic formulator, specializing in the development of skincare and hair care formulas. Okay, we got your presentation up. Formula, so we're going to be talking about, so we've gone through preservative regulations. We've gone through preservative, just the different kind of alternative ones, and now we're going to look at formulation with preservatives. So,
thank you, Perry, for the presentation, and I also would like to thank you, Gail, for the invitation and Technoscience that put together this very interesting event. I also thank the giants that spoke before us. As Realm HPC, we would like to present a topic that is very warm in this moment in the cosmetic market, that is for sure linked with the formula protection. So the concept to study a strategy for the safety and the preservation of the formulation, together with the brand new concept of the skin microbiota and the possible or not possible introduction into the formulation of ingredients that are so-called microbiota friendly. So, moving ahead, this is briefly the agenda we are going to talk today, and I am with my colleague Federica Garavaglia. She's a formulator, and she will drive you through the challenge that we have started to investigate about the possible opportunity to try to get any information, if there are, about the combination and the interaction between the so-called microbiota-friendly ingredients and classic preservatives that are used in cosmetic formulation. We start talking, saying that, of course, the cosmetic safety is basic for the production of a cosmetic that is used by the consumer, and the foundation of the safety in a cosmetic product is the fact that this product must be preserved. As Rosanna said at the beginning, when there is someone is moving the slides, not me, sorry. Sorry, it's not my fault. Someone was moving the slide. And I was mentioning that, as Rosanna said before, it's important to include the preservative, and every time there is written preservative free, we should worry and we should ask what is going to happen to the final formulation that is sold into the market. On the box, in the box on the right, there is an interesting topic, that is the investigation about what's the interaction between the preservative system and the skin, considered not simply as a surface where you put your cosmetic products, but as an ecosystem. Ecosystem composed by two protagonists, the skin itself as the environment, and of course, the microbiota, so the better to say billions of microorganisms that lives on the skin. So, very briefly, this is something that we are aware about, is formula protection is important. When you develop a new formula, you need to add the preservatives in order to guarantee the safety and the stability of the... Please, Don, stop moving the slide. Donald, please. Remove the control. If a technoscience technician can help us, otherwise it's a mess here. Sorry. So preservative is necessary to have a stable and safe formula that must be put into the market, and this formula can be a successful formula if it includes a stable safety preservative system that is working together with active ingredients and interesting sensorial functional ingredients inside. But let's move to the reason why it's important to put preservatives. In the last 5 years, if you consider the European market, the number of the product that has been recalled because of contamination has doubled. And this is an increasing that is dramatic, of course, and most of the cases in which the product has been recalled, it was because the formulation was containing or was not containing preservatives and was claiming preservative-free or something like that. So it's important to consider that the safety of the formula means the safety of the consumer. And of course, it is something that everybody of us as stakeholder must keep into consideration. Considering the microbiota, so far the big difference between the past and nowadays is that in the past, even when the cosmetic legislation in Europe was studied and edited, the microorganisms were seen simply like pathogens that we must keep under control in order to decrease the contamination of the final cosmetic formulation. Actually, with the new trend of the consideration of microorganisms in the two ways, on a side, like ingredients that we can use in cosmetic formulation, and on the other side, the microorganism that lives on our skin, the panorama is completely changed. And nowadays, because of these two new frontiers, several questions are rising. And Federica will try to give you some indication and possible way to answer in the last part of this presentation. But let's start from the fact that we consider microorganisms or microbiota-friendly ingredients like ingredients that we put into the formula. So prebiotic, postbiotic, and probiotics today are words that are widely used in cosmetic formulation, but actually they're not synonymous, and in most of the cases, the consumer do not know the differences between these words. While prebiotics is the food that is used by the probiotics, which are the microorganism, alive microorganism that lives in the formulation or on our skin. Then you have postbiotics, that are the metabolites produced by the microorganism. Prebiotics, food; probiotics, the microorganism; postbiotics, the metabolites produced by the microorganisms themselves. When we include, and when we want to include some microorganisms into cosmetic formulation, it is almost impossible to include a live microorganism in the final formulation. Why? It is very simple. If you include an alive microorganism in a cosmetic formulation, you still have to add the preservative on a side, and then you have to consider the process of production. And in these cases, the preservative does the preservative, and the production steps, the production technology, in most of the cases, is going to kill the probiotics into the final formula, so they're not alive anymore. So today, if we consider which kind of ingredients we can include in the final formulation, we should speak better about dead microorganisms that are called in two different names. One is lysate, and the other one is tyndalized. Well, lysate are the microorganisms that are killed and are destroyed. So in the final solution that you have together the metabolites that are included inside the microorganism and the membrane that is still there but cut into small pieces. On the other side, you have the tyndalized. Tyndalized are the microorganisms still entire, dead but entire. In these two cases, lysate or tyndalized, you have ingredients that you can include into your final formulation. Not anymore alive, so it's not correct to call them probiotic. You should call them with the right name, that is lysate and tyndalized. Last but not least, an important difference in the wording, microbiome and microbiota. In most of the cases today, these two words are used as synonymous. Actually, they are not, because if we consider the numbers and the inhabitants of our skin, we should call them microbiota. If you consider the microbiome, you're not talking about the inhabitants, but you're talking about their genomic code, so their DNA. So should be better to use microbiota to indicate the population of the microorganism that lives on our skin. Once again, to repeat and to recall the key concept. Microorganisms today could be considered ingredients for cosmetic formulation, like tyndalized or lysate. Different story is whatever you have in your formulation that get in contact and interaction with the microbiota you have on the skin. Until a few years ago, everybody of us was thinking that the first alive person that get in touch with the cosmetic formula could be shampoo, liquid bath, cream, eyeliner, whatever, is ourselves, our skin. Well, it is not true, because we have recently discovered that the first alive creatures impacting with the cosmetic products are billions, better to say, of microorganisms that lives on us. The big question that is one of the many that have been opened by this new frontier is what's going to happen to these new, inhabitants of the skin when they get in contact with our cosmetic formulation. Mostly, what's going to happen when these microorganisms get in contact with the preservative system or the formulation that we put on our skin. So, key concepts still remain the protection and of the cosmetic formulation, the protection of the skin, the protection of the end user. But the new open door is that we have to keep in mind that we still have to protect also the inhabitants of the skin, our skin microbiota. And so far, for the, let's say, very few information that the scientific cosmetic world has in this moment in their hands, the answer we have is that what we have to do is to do not create an unbalancing in the original balanced situation of our skin. So to keep the eubiosis is the most important part of the impact of the cosmetic product on our skin. They are very important, our skin microbiota, because we have to consider that we are composed about 10 quadrillions of cells, but the microorganism, sorry. Sei stato tu? We have to consider that the microorganisms that live on our skin are 10 times more. So there are 100 quadrillions of inhabitants. And they have been here before us. They can live without us. We cannot live without them. So keeping the eubiosis with this kind of microorganism is mandatory to have a safety and effective formulation for our skin. Interesting is that in the last years, this market regarding the skin microbiota is exploding, dramatically exploding. Of course, as an opportunity for the market. And if you consider the Asia Pacific, European, and the other nations, the number of products that have been launched targeting in some way the skin microbiota is jumping rapidly. And so there are many opportunities for our formulation. In the same time, with this explosion of the opportunities, you have an explosion of questions, because this is one of the cases in which the science goes faster than the regulatory. My last slide before I give the podium to my colleague Federica for the part of the formulation and the challenge that she has is about the questions. So, as I mentioned before, now that the market has discovered the skin microbiota and we know we are interacting with someone else respect of us, before us, what's going to happen to this microorganism? And if so far the regulatory has considered the microorganism simply from the part of the pathogenic problem, and so I have to kill the bad ones in the formulation in order to keep the safe formula for the health of the consumer. What's going to happen on the commensal that lives on our skin? One of the many open questions that we have in the market. And second, regarding the microorganisms as possible ingredients. Is it easy, or is it possible for the formulators to include into the formulation microorganism, dead microorganism such as lysate and tindalized? Just few questions of the many of millions that we have today, and now Federica, you have maybe something to tell to us in terms of answers.
Andrea, for your explanation, and good morning to everyone. So, as he previously said, the skin microbiota trends opens up several doubts, especially in formulation. In fact, when we decided to study this trend topic, one of the questions that we asked was if the introduction of microbiota-friendly ingredients inside a finished cosmetic product could have an interfere with the preservative inside the base cream. We ask several questions, including if the preservative could have reduced the efficacy of microbiota-friendly ingredients, if the preservative could have had an impact on skin microbiota, and if microbiota-friendly ingredients could have interfered with preservative efficacy. So to investigate about this point, we decided to perform a microbiological challenge test comparing 3 different base creams. So the first cream was a base cream preserved with 1% of BIOS control synergy ice. The second cream was a base cream always preserved with 1% of BIOS control synergy ice. in which we added 2% of a natural prebiotic, and the Inky name is inulin and alpha-glucan oligosaccharide. And we tested also a base cream, always preserved with 1% of BIOS control Synergy Ice, in which we added 2% of inactivated bacteria. So I would like to explain very quickly the selection of microbiota-friendly ingredients and what the microbiota-friendly ingredients are. So inulin and alpha-glucan oligosaccharide is a prebiotic ingredients that helps, that work as a kind of food supplement and helps to protect skin microbiota. The inactivated Lactobacillus rhamnosus are inactivated bacteria, and they undergo a heat treatment process for some days. And these tyndalized products are finally diluted in maltodextrin that acts as a cryoprotector in order to protect bacteria and cells from the damage. And it helps also to facilitate the introduction into a base cream. So the introduction in this base cream, both for the prebiotics and for the tyndalized products, help to support and reinforce the skin barrier, helps to rebalance the skin microbiota composition, make it stronger also against external factor and some possible aggression by pathogens. So here you can see the results of our challenge test. In the first graph, you see the emulsion only preserved with 1% of Synergy Ice. And we can see that during the 28 days for the challenge test, you can observe a decrease of all 5 strains tested. So we can affirm that in this case that the preservatives is for sure effective. In the second graph, we can see the emulsion preserved with 1% of Synergy Ice, in which we added 2% of prebiotics. So we observe several decrease regarding the gram plus, the gram minus, and the yeast. But we observe a very slow decline regarding the Aspergillus brasiliensis. In the third graph, we see the emulsion with 1% of Synergy Ice, in which we added 2% of inactivated bacteria, and we observe several decrease for all the 5 strains tested in the challenge test. So, as conclusion, observing this result, we can affirm that the efficacy of the preservative system against bacteria and the yeast is not to be affected by the presence of prebiotic and tyndalized bacteria. Talking about the mold is interesting. It would seem that the tyndalized bacteria boost the preservative efficacy. At the contrary, the prebiotic reduce it. For sure, it's not too possible to conclude that these results are valid for the entire class of tyndalized bacteria and prebiotics. So we can affirm as conclusion that these first experimental results shown that there is no interference of the 2 selected microbiota-friendly ingredients, so both for the prebiotics and tyndalized bacteria, on the efficacy of preservative. And this is a very interesting point and is in contrast with our doubts, in which we ask if the microbiota-friendly ingredients could have an impact on the efficacy of the preservative. And for sure, these are only the first preliminary results, and we have to go dive into this topic in the future. So we can affirm that the microbiota-friendly ingredients it not seems to interfere with the efficacy of preservative, but for sure some topics remains open. So we have to answer if the preservative could reduce the efficacy of microbiota-friendly ingredients, and if preservatives could have an impact on skin microbiota. So thank you very much for your attention, and if you have some question. Okay. No problem.
Okay, we had a couple of questions. This here. Sarah wanted to know, when using probiotics as an ingredient, you still need to add preservatives, and do preservatives kill the probiotics that are added to the formulation? And so your experiment was just sort of demonstrating that. Now that was if you're using probiotics as living organisms, but how about the probiotics which are not living?
Actually, if I can answer, Federica,
Yes.
audio. If I can answer, today, technically, it seems that it is almost impossible to add probiotics, that means a live microorganism, in the formulation, because there are technical difficulties. And you can add only tindalized or lysate. Still, you have to preserve the formulation, because the microorganisms are an ingredient, and even if they are good ones, let's say commensal, still you have the problem in the possible contamination of the pathogens into the final formula. So the intent of the preservative that you have to add is to stop the pollution of the other bad ones. But the good ones could be included as dead microorganisms. About probiotic, so far, is not technically possible for our knowledge. We are trying to do something, but it seems a little bit tricky.
That was one of the things that you mentioned about the good microbiota and the bad or the unfriendly ones. What's the difference between them? How do you know what's good? How do you know what's bad?
Everybody of us has a different kind of microorganisms that are living on our skin, and what I have on my skin, Per, is different than what you have on your skin, Federica, and the other people listening to us. And not simply this difference, but other differences that are also occurring during the day. What I have on my right cheek is different to what I have on my left cheeks. In the same time, what I have on my right cheek in the morning is not what you have in the same right cheek in the evening. So there are many opportunities and many different inhabitants on our skin. It's impossible to make a clear map of everybody. The only thing, better to say, the evidence we have today so far, under a scientific point of view, is that most of the inhabitants of our skin are commensal, considered good ones if they are in a certain number. There is a small part, a very small part of pathogens, and they are necessary. It is necessary to keep this balance between, let's say, several good ones and a small amount of bad ones. And we have to keep this balance as it is. We have to recall in our mind that the human being is the result of thousands of years of evolution, and we cannot be wrong as per natural evolution. So if we have this balance of microorganisms, it should stay as it is. Everything you do that make an imbalance on this balanced situation create problems. It is clear today that an unbalanced microbiota is causing skin problems. In the same time, a skin that has problems cause an unbalancing in the skin microbiota. Is an intimate connection between the two worlds.
Okay, Frederica, one of the questions that came up was about your experiments, and what do you think was the reason that the preservatives did not interfere with the good microbiotas?
But we are investigated on this topic. It could be that selection of the preservative, and we cannot answer with this at this question, honestly. If Andrea could support me, but we have to investigate again on this topic for sure, because it's a little bit strange, but we obtained these results. So,
Federica, yes, Federica, I would like to add something, if possible.
Sure.
Simply, we tested one preservative strategy with one prebiotic and one tyndalized ingredient inside, and in a percentage of 2% of the preservative system. And when you do this kind of investigation, it's one shot in a billions of possible shots that you have to do. So the possibilities are so many, and the answer actually are not so clear for anybody in this moment. You should perform many other tests that, as you can imagine, has a cost. And we are doing our part, but the industry, of course, is curious to know more information about that. Frankly speaking, from our point of view, won't be easy and won't be fast to get this kind of information. For sure, it's in a frontier, full of opportunities and also full of money that you have to spend to get some answers.
I'll just have one more question before I bring our panelists back for about 5 more minutes of questioning. But one more question about this. What would be the benefit to including dead microorganisms in your formula, even if they were good?
There is an evidence about that. Thank you for the question, because it's quite interesting. Even if they are dead, especially when they are entire, so tyndalized, there is an evidence that the alive microbiota on our skin is recognizing the envelope, the structure of the other microorganisms, even if they're dead, and they're interacting in several ways. And one of the ways that they can eat the dead microorganism, and they can use this microorganism as a food, so they can become in some way probiotics. Prebiotics.
Who knew microbes were cannibals? You know. All right, let's bring our other speakers back on, if we still have anyone. Roseanne, Donald, David. If you could just mic back up. We had a couple of questions. Oh, here comes some people. There's Roseanne. Hello. Okay, I'm gonna disappear so we can have more cameras on, but you will still hear my voice. Well, Rosanna, while you're on there, there was a question that I had directed at you. Can sodium benzoate substitute the efficacy of an MIT CIT preservative at low concentrations? Is there a better option for MIT CIT? So it's methyl isothiazolanones, I think.
Yes, it can. Again, I'm always going to talk to you about pH because it's an organic acid. So at pHs of around 3, you can use 0.1% sodium benzoate and be very efficacious. So as you go up in pH, the concentration of sodium benzoate will have to go up, and it would be more than an IT concentration. But at low pHs, works as well at low concentrations as the ITs.
Okay. Don, here's a question for you. Chanel said she's interested in masking the odor in a formulation without actually adding any sense. Were there any of the ingredients that you talked about that might help to create odorless fragrances that are used in cosmetics?
I really don't know. I know there's masking agents, but they're not preservatives. I don't know if there's the compounds I talked to will do that.
Yeah, it's for that question. I think your best bet is to use a masking agent or choose options that don't have an odor.
Right.
And Andrea, is it possible to perform the challenge tests when you have probiotic materials in your formulas?
Tricky question, Perry. Tricky question, because as I said before, the question is possible to put probiotic inside the formulation? For the moment, no, because you are going against the law. Because you have to consider the total microbial count into the formulation. So the answer to this question is quite tricky. If I cannot include probiotics, how can I perform a challenge test?
Yeah. Well, you know, interestingly, there is a brand here in the United States that claims they are selling living bacteria. It's a cleansing one. I wonder how they I wonder how they do that.
We wonder the same in Europe. We wonder the
Ah.
same in Europe. In one of my slides, I skipped it because it was the time was not enough. But just to give you an idea, in Europe we have a federation of the producer of ingredients, of the producer of ingredients for cosmetic, and there is a working group inside that is dedicated to understand what is the wording that you can use in terms of claiming, labeling the final product. And so far, it's not clear what you can say in this kind of label, because probiotic are against the law. As I mentioned during the presentation, when the legislation was edited, there was inside clearly written that the microbial count must be less than 100 UFC per gram. So if you add probiotics, you are exploding the number of microorganisms inside. So also we wonder how it's possible that in some cases there are this kind of labeling. And the proof that it is not easy is that also in Europe so far, no one is doing the same for our knowledge. Everybody would like to find the right way to open the door, because it's an opportunity, as we said.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, we just have just 1 minute left here, and what I want to first do is thank all of our experts for coming on and giving us your input about preservatives. I'll just leave with one final question to experts, and I'll just start with each of you. We'll start with you, Andrea. What do you think the future is of preservatives?
Starting from me, sorry, or
yeah, starting with you, Andrea. Yeah.
The future of preservative for me is alive and interesting, because the safety is the pillar on which the European legislation 1223 was written on. So if the formula is not safe, it's not a cosmetic product. And so to have a safe formula, you need a preservative. It must be regulated for the safety of the consumer and the safety of the formula in the same time. So for me, it's a green future.
Rosanna, what do you think about the future of preservatives?
I'm very much with Andrea. I think that it's a green future, and that we're going to always have to have preservatives, because if you think about why we have preservatives, it allows us to have products for many years to sit on the shelf, right? And there'd be a lot of waste if that was not the case. So I think the future for preservatives is good, but obviously it's going to evolve.
And Don, I'll give you the last word. What do you think about the future of preservatives?
I think for the future, I think we're going to lose a couple more traditional preservatives, but however, I think that we'll find alternative compounds to be used, but because of the cost, I don't think these things are going to be registered as a preservative. So that's what I think is going to be happening. We will find other things to use, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult in the future. I think we do have tools in the toolbox.
Yes, it always gets harder as a formulator when you can't use stuff that was working. All right. Well, thank you so much for all of our speakers. Thank you for TKS and for Gail. Your organization skills here, very top notch. Thank you to all of our attendees. I saw at one point we had well over 550 people. So that was a lot of people in the audience today from around the world. I thank you very much. I think that's going to bring us to the end. Is that right, Gail?
Yeah, sure. So I would like to thank everybody. I would like to thank the speakers, first of all, you, Perry, for sharing, as usual, a fantastic discussion. I follow you on your, everywhere in your webinars. And I would like to thank the sponsor, Emerald, for giving us the opportunity to give the possibility to share this event for free to the attendees. I would like to thank my colleague Matteo from the IT department, who tried to solve all the the last minute issues, but thank God we made it. And for the questions arriving from the audience about the presentation, you will receive an email with the presentations for those who didn't have the chance to download, and of course, and also a certificate of participation, so that your boss knows that you spent very nicely your time during the day. So thanks a lot again for your time, and keep in touch for our next live conference. Thanks to all of you.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye. Take care.